Welcome to Literary Latte, the podcast with a Southern accent on writing. I'm Lynda Bouchard, and it's time for your jolt of literary inspiration. We're proud to be sponsored by Macintosh Bookshop and the Beaufort Bookstore, located in Beaufort, South Carolina. The success of these stores begins with owner Wilson McIntosh. He's a champion of writers. Macintosh Bookshop is located in the historic district on Bay Street, where it has thrived for over 30 years, specializing in Civil War history, sporting books, and carrying titles by local and regional authors. They also have an amazing rare book collection and a selection dedicated to Pat Conroy's novels. Their sister store, the Beaufort Bookstore, is located on Boundary Street in the business district. Think of it as the hip, modern sister of the Bay Street location. The Beaufort Bookstore carries Southern fiction, a great selection of children's books, popular fiction of all genres, and gift items. If you love books and great bookstores, then be sure and stop by both locations when you're in Beaufort, South Carolina. Macintosh Bookshop and the Beaufort Bookstore, where the best Southern stories begin. Now on to the show. Joining me today from Winston-Salem, North Carolina is Kevin Watson, founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Press 53, an independent publisher specializing in poetry and short fiction. His publishing house has issued books by noted poet laureates Marjorie Wentworth and Shelby Stevenson, among others, and has published many highly acclaimed collections of short fiction. Today, Kevin will talk about his own reinvention and that story, along with the advantages of publishing with a small press for authors. He'll share news about the launch of a new literary festival and how the heck he came up with a name for his company. Hey, Kevin, it's great to have you here.
Lynda, I have been looking forward to this for weeks.
Oh, as have I. And so let's get right to it. You know, you tell stories and your authors and poets are storytellers, but I want you to tell the story of how you created Press 53 because it is one of reinvention.
Yes, well, if you've ever seen the movie Field of Dreams, that's basically our story. I was a writer for years, publishing in journals and magazines and working in the airline industry to feed the family. And after 9/11, things changed. And shortly after 9/11, I lost my job. About 2.5 years after that, I lost my job and had to find something else to do. Nobody was hiring, so I started editing for other writers and picking up more work that way and teaching workshops and the like. And then I got the idea one day after not being able to write because of the stress levels and that I was really enjoying the editing process, helping other writers get published. And so I thought, well, maybe I can start a small press and have something to do creative on my own part until I figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. So in October of 2005, I started Press 53, and within 6 months, we were flying at light speed and hadn't even cleared the trees yet, and I was scared to death, but we were really rolling right along. I'd taken on a partner in January, and it's been quite a ride.
Right. And so why just then short fiction and poetry? Because I know you and your team are big champions of these two genres. So why did you land on that? And talk about the way you came up with a name for your publishing house.
Well, the name came from my lucky number, 53. Which I came up with when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. My lucky number had been 7, but then I found out it was my brother's lucky number, and he wasn't going to give it up. And then I thought, I bet a lot of people have that number. So I sat down at my desk and wrote down the numbers 1 through 9, and I remember adding 0 because I thought, well, that's a number too. And then it occurred to me that probably all these numbers are somebody's lucky number. So if I have a 2-digit lucky number, maybe the odds are no one else will have it. And of course, after I settled on 53, I liked the way 3 looked and 5 looked, but they opposed each other when you did 35. And when you switched it around to 53, they embraced each other. And I just liked the way that looked. So, I mean, even at that young age, I was thinking about these things. It's crazy. And then, lo and behold, a couple of years later, Disney comes out with the movie Herbie the Love Bug, and there on the door and the hood of Herbie is this number 53. So, but I hung in there with it. I wouldn't give it up. So that's how I came up with the number for the press. I thought it'd be different. It would stand out. And I did have someone write to me shortly afterward and said, no, you have to have an image. There has to be an image for your press. Otherwise, people will forget it. And I thought, well, I'm not turning my back on my lucky number. And it's been very lucky for us. And the reason we settled on poetry and short fiction was because that's what I was writing and publishing, and I loved it. And I knew that most publishers weren't doing a lot of poetry and short fiction because they didn't think there was a market for it. But I knew from experience that the poetry and short fiction communities were vast, very large, and very supportive of each other. All I had to do was be able to connect with them in some way, and therefore, because the internet had become more prominent, it was, the internet was the new word of mouth. So I thought, well, if word gets out, then we'll be okay. And to give you an example of how well that works, we had in January of 2006 a launch party for the press, which was my former partner, Cheryl Monks' idea, to have a launch party here in Winston-Salem. And we sent invitations to everybody we could think of and invited 4 of our authors, short fiction authors, because we'd only done short fiction at that point, to come and read. And it was at Borders Books here in Winston. And that night, about 250 people showed up for this, and it was the largest crowd they'd ever had in Borders Books. And we sold a bunch of books that night, and during the Q&A period afterwards, someone said, are you going to publish anything besides short fiction? And we mentioned that we were going to be publishing poetry as well, and that was it. We just mentioned that. We were going to be publishing poetry as well, and we were going to be looking for manuscripts. And within 2 weeks, we had received 120 manuscripts from writers on 5 continents in both hemispheres.
Really?
And yeah. And the crazy thing is that we read them all blind. We just went through them and read them. And we picked 2 out that we really liked, we loved. One was by Valerie Neiman, who lives in Greensboro and teaches at NCA&T, which is about 25 minutes up the road from where we are. And the other one was from Joseph Mills, who was a teacher at the North Carolina School of the Arts here in Winston-Salem. Now, I don't know how that happened. It wasn't by design, but they just happened. Both these people happened to be just in our backyard. So it was a lot of crazy things like that happened.
Right. And that's such a beautiful story because you're giving a platform to a couple of genres that are often overlooked. So what happens? Okay, you talk about getting all these manuscripts all at once after your launch party, which is fabulous. So a manuscript comes across your desk, Kevin. What are the top 3 things that you look for?
Oh, boy. I want to be taken someplace I've never been. And which might be why we've published more women than men, because the women surprise me. They take me places and they show me things, and even their feelings and their points of view surprise me sometimes. It really opens my eyes to that, and I really enjoy that. I also look for a clean manuscript, and that doesn't mean that I don't want to edit it, that I can't sit down and work with the writer on making it more clear, fixing things that might be an issue. But I'm looking for a unique voice that tells a story in a way that flows. We're all everything is energy, even the words on the page. And I'm looking for a manuscript when I read it that I get lost in it. If there are speed bumps, if there are chunky sentences, or potholes, or holes missing in the storyline, or whatever. that are going to pull me out of the story, that's a problem. So I'm looking for words that flow, that connect with me, and they flow right through me. And the other thing is I'm looking for writers who have been working hard building readership outside of their own circle. It's not enough to be a great writer. You have to, especially in poetry and short fiction, this is where poets and short fiction writers have an advantage over novelists. There are hundreds and hundreds of journals, magazines, and opportunities out there to publish these short pieces. And that can open doors for your longer pieces. So, my advice to anyone who wants to be a novelist, write some short stories, put them out there. There's no better calling card than a publication. So I'm looking for writers who've been building readership as well and working hard. It doesn't do me any good to publish a book if the writer's not going to get out and support it,
right?
Go out and give readings and all that. And if they're a poet and short fiction writer with publication credits, there's a very good chance that they've been given readings, they've met other poets and short fiction writers, they've been building a support team beyond their arm's reach.
Yeah, that is so important. The marketing of it is essential. And I often tell clients, congratulations, you finished your book. The easy part is over,
That is true. That is very true.
And to your point that the author has to have their own platforms and get out there and work it is so essential. And so many authors have this misguided idea that once their book is published, it'll just magically happen. Yep. And the challenges are so incredible these days because, believe it or not, even robots can write with our technology and create and publish. So talk a little bit about that, Kevin, because as the quality content becomes more available, content on its own becomes less valuable maybe. So the marketing and platform capabilities that help readers discover and engage will be the big differentiators, I think.
Right, yeah, and I think that, with AI being artificial intelligence being the buzzword these days, that, computer programs can write, but I think in my lifetime, we're not going to see it. We're going to approach anywhere near what humans can do. There might be a time when that happens, and if it does, I think we should all be very frightened. Part of being alive is being able to problem solve. If you look around you in your office right now or your home, everything in your home or office was created to solve a problem. And that's part of the human experience, is the ability to solve problems. That gives us a reason for getting out of bed in the morning. If you had no problems to solve, then what are you going to do? You're going to get bored pretty quickly. So that's not going to be that's something I'm not too worried about. But, here's an example. Recently, we signed a poetry collection by a young poet I've known for, I think, 12 years now, maybe 11, 12 years, Jacinta White. Wonderful, wonderful poet.
Okay.
And she has a new collection coming out where she had toured all over the South, from North Carolina to Texas, visiting African-American churches and graveyards. And she made this trip with her uncle. Her father was a minister, and he passed away when she was about 11 or 12, which had a huge impact on her life. And so the uncle wanted to take her around to all these churches where he had pastored. And so she kept up this trip going and visiting, because she found that after visiting some of these places, that a poem would come to her, that experience that she wanted to share, these stories that were inspired by these trips. And so she sent me the manuscript. I'd seen some of the poems in magazines and journals, and I'd heard Jacinta read a couple of times, and she's a wonderful reader. So she sent us the manuscript, handed it off to my poetry editor, Chris Forrest, and he loved it. I read it. I loved it. So I contacted Jacinta, and she came by the office, and she lives locally, and signed a contract on it. And she said, I had this feeling when I was writing this book that I was on a journey, and I was going to a place, and publication was that place. And now that it's here, I feel like the next part of this journey is ahead of me. That once I get this book in my hands, my journey is really just beginning. That now I get to go out and share this experience with all these people. And that was so wise of her, because your book is only going to find readership if you get out and meet people and shake hands.
Right.
And then they read it and they start talking about it and telling their friends, you have to read this book. That's how it happens.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've published a first book for someone, and after the book has been out 2 or 3 weeks, they're asking me if I'd like to look at their next collection.
Really?
And my response, oh yeah, I call that your first book syndrome, to where they don't feel this validation. They want to feel more validated, and they think the book is going to do that. Well, the book is not going to do that. The book is going to give you an opportunity for validation, and that is going out, getting out, sharing your work with readers, and having them take you home with them. And the only way they can do that, unless you're one of those people, is they're going to buy the book and take the book home, and they're going to experience your words, and your voice is going to be in their head while they're reading it. It's so important, and that's how you build readership.
Absolutely.
So I always tell writers when they contact me within 6 months or even a year of their book coming out, I've got another collection. Would you like to look at it? I tell them, give this book a couple of years. You spent years working on it. Give it the respect it's due. Go out and support it. That's really what you have to do.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more, Kevin, because it is, you're dealing with a unique product when you're dealing with a book, because you have a tangible object with intangible ideas inside of it. So an author has to create that energy and that excitement before anyone even buys the book. So, it's not all on the internet and social media. That authentic engagement is primo. You can't beat it.
Right. Well, and I've been accused by some folks of putting too much emphasis on my authors selling books. I'm constantly telling them, get out and give readings. They can buy books from us at a discount, go out and sell them, and that helps support their travel. They can keep any proceeds from that. But I remind them that, we've got to sell books to stay in business, because I don't run a nonprofit press. I'm not asking for handouts. We stay in business when people buy our books.
Right.
And if I'm not publishing books that people want to voluntarily, put $15 down for and take home with them, then maybe I shouldn't be making books. But I tell them that selling that book, every time you sell a book, you're bringing a reader into your circle. And with every reader you bring in your circle, there's potential for more readers, because that reader, if the reader becomes a fan, that reader will go out and sing your praises and bring more people to your book. And really, that's what it's all about. That's why you want a book. You want readership. So go out and build that.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important, Kevin, for an author to define their goals before they even write a single word, because every author's goals, as you know, are different. Some just want to write something for family heritage. They don't want a wide audience. Some want to be, blockbuster bestseller authors. So everybody's goals are different. So defining that ahead of time really helps in the marketing component of it. And that's where most authors get tripped up, because they wait until the book is out and they say to someone like me who does marketing for authors, they say, "Hey, Lynda, how do I sell these things?" And I'm like, "Oh, really? You're just thinking of it now?" I mean, it's like preparing for a birth. If I could give an analogy, I mean, you're making plans for this baby 9 months ahead of time, and you're telling everybody about it, right? It's no different with a book.
Well, and the other thing is you have to get out and meet your comrades. Publishing is one way to do that because you're going to appear in magazines and journals with other poets and writers who might read your work, and they might contact you by email or Facebook or whatever to tell you, I really enjoyed your piece. You may become friends with them. Mm-hmm. Early on, we published a story collection by Clifford Garstang called In an Uncharted Country, and he was looking for blurbs. That's the little pieces on the back cover that praise the work and praise the book and all that. And so he sent me his first blurb that he got, and it was from Elizabeth Strout. And this was about 2 weeks before she won the Pulitzer Prize for Olive Kitteridge. Mm. And so when she won the Pulitzer, I said, wow, this person who blurbed your book just won the Pulitzer. How do you know her? And he said, well, I studied with her at the MFA program at Queen's University. Mm-hmm. I said, oh, well, that was lucky. And then a few weeks later, we got another blurb in from Tim O'Brien, from, who's the things they carried, which is probably one of the most anthologized stories and one of the best story collections ever published.
Just beautiful.
And so I said, Cliff, how'd you get a blurb from Tim O'Brien? And he said, well, I went to I took a workshop from him at such and such place, and he liked my work, and so I've been sending him stories now and then, and we've become friends, and he likes my writing. So I said, wow. So, there's a good example of how getting out, you got to get out from behind the desk once in a while and go out and meet the people and become active in the community, be a literary citizen, in other words.
I love
so
that.
That way when your book comes out, you've got somebody of note who's going to say, here we go.
Right. And you never know. You're right. You have to put yourself out there. And I love that phrase you just said, a literary citizen. So we are going to take a quick break, Kevin. And when we come back, I'd like to talk to you, speaking of literary citizens, about the new book festival that you're launching next month. So we will be right back.
Psst. Hey, author, want to get your latest title published as an audiobook on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes? You can do it. Just reach out to audiobooksolution.com.
If you write poetry or short fiction or just love being around people who do, then make plans to attend the High Road Festival of Poetry and Short Fiction the weekend of March 22nd in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Learn from some of today's top writers, attend masterclasses, seminars, and one-on-one critique sessions, and meet publishers, editors, and podcasters throughout the weekend. Oh, and dust off your spurs, buckaroos. The festival kicks off Friday night, March 22nd, with a special reading by the acclaimed cowboy poet, Sean Sexton. And my podcast will be live at the festival, so be sure to look for the Literary Latte banner. I'll be holding open mic sessions and looking for great sound bites and guests for future episodes. You'll find a link to the High Road Festival of Poetry and Short Fiction in the show notes, or just go to Press 53, that's press53.com. See you there. Now back to the show. If you're just joining us, I'm Lynda Bouchard. You're listening to Literary Latte, and my guest is Kevin Watson, founder and publisher of Press 53, a small publishing firm specializing in poetry and short fiction based in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So, Kevin, before the break, we were talking about being literary citizens of the world, and I would love for you to share the news about your festival coming up in Winston-Salem next month and tell us what's what that is all about and how the idea for it came about, and as much as you can share with us.
Yeah, well, we're going to be launching the High Road Festival of Poetry and Short Fiction here in Winston-Salem. It'll take place the weekend of March 22nd through 24th, with most of the activities happening on Saturday, March 23rd. We have several fantastic writers, some of the best writers in poetry and short fiction, coming to Winston-Salem to teach seminars, master classes in both genres. We'll have a reading room that's open to the public for free, where our faculty will be reading throughout the day, a couple of open mic sessions, and we have a vendor room with lots of vendors who will be there to discuss publication of poetry and short fiction and other things. And from my research, it appears that there's a festival similar to this for poetry and short fiction in Scotland, which I think is fantastic. But there's not one here in the States. So poetry and short fiction, when you go to a lot of these literary festivals, are oftentimes not well represented. So, but I know that we have the base there that will support this. And being small, we don't have to have, thousands of people come out to make it a success. But, a couple hundred would be nice. So we're going to start that and see where it goes.
Right. And I look forward to it too, because I'll be there with an open mic with this podcast. And wow, I look forward to meeting all of your fabulous authors and meeting new ones.
This is an opportunity for people who love poetry and short fiction to meet people like Kathy Smith Bowers, who's a former poet laureate of North Carolina, David Joss, who's regarded as one of the best short fiction writers in the U.S. today. He's been publishing for close to 40 years, and he's been won the Pushcart twice and was in Best of the Pushcart Prize, won numerous awards for his stories. And we've got two of his new and selected collections with Press 53. Clint McCown, who's the only writer to win the American Fiction Prize twice, will be doing a master class. We have just a wide range, 19 different faculty members. Keith Flynn, who's the founder of the Asheville Poetry Review, will be doing a master class, and many other writers of note.
Yeah, some real quality writers there for those classes. And wow, I look forward to that too. So folks, come out to that the weekend of March 22nd in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I'll have more about that too, Kevin, in the show notes. But let's talk a little bit about the value of a real book. And I'd like to get your opinion about whether you think real books will ever go away.
I think that the printed book will go out of style when blankets go out of style. And for the very same reason, because there's a comfort level there. Now, imagine this. If you are at home and it's a little chilly, or you just want something to keep you warm, and you've got two options: a nice fluffy blanket or one of these aluminum foil space blankets that you can keep in in your car in case of emergencies. Which one are you going to grab?
Right.
And I guarantee you, everybody's going to grab the blanket because it feels good. There's a sensual experience there. It engages all of your senses. It doesn't just feel good, but there's a smell to it. There's an experience to it. It looks better. It's just much more interesting.
I agree.
I think, and that's why we don't do our poetry books as ebooks. Because I think every poet I've ever met, when they read poetry, they want to hold the book in their hand. They want to feel those pages and smell them and hear the sound of turning the page and the connection you have. Even though you know that the writer didn't place every single letter on that, that a computer did it. There's a connection with the writer when you're holding those words in your hand. And you don't get that from an e-reader. There's a disconnect there.
I agree.
We do some of our short story collections in ebooks. Our authors want that, but we don't sell many. I think the ebook is really the land of genre novels and big books that people don't want to lug around with them on an airplane, which is fine. You can take hundreds of books with you on vacation that way. But I think when you're in your home, can you imagine a home without a bookcase?
Oh, Kevin, I know that would be tragic. That would be tragic.
Yeah, I mean,
I
you have
agree
someone
with
walk into your home. They can find out who you are in a few minutes just by looking at your bookcase and what you read. And there's something nice about that.
Yes, there is a sense of warmth, and that holding a book, I believe reading is a tactile as well as an intellectual experience. And although ebooks can help bolster print book sales, if it's a
Right.
book the reader really loves, the reader will want to hold it
Right.
and own it, not just virtually. So, and
Exactly.
there's kind of a cool way to gauge how important real books still are, and that is during any summer season walking on the beach. You do not see somebody holding an iPad. You see people holding paperback books and real books, and it's kind of like a focus group.
Yeah, and if the tide comes in and washes away your book, you can usually replace it for about $20 or less.
There's
But an
that
e-reader,
too.
man, you got to dig into your pocket for that. So,
Good point.
there are
Kevin.
advantages. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. So tell me what some of the challenges are for you these days of running a small press, whether it's the day-to-day things, even the minutia, because the publishing world is changing so rapidly. How are you keeping on top of that?
Well, there's so many distractions out there for all of us. And I'm to blame for, I'm not to blame, but I'm guilty of being distracted by things that are online. And I go on Facebook just to see what my friends are up to, and I spend an hour there just looking mindlessly at all this stuff that pops up. And so it can really steal your time from you. And it's also hard to get someone's attention. So if we have an event coming up or a new book that's out, we've got over 4,000 followers on our Facebook page at Press 53. But even posting something there, I don't think even a tenth of the people who are friends of the press are actually seeing those messages that what we have is going on. So we rely on email to do that. People can subscribe to our email list, and we'll send an email out when we have a new title coming out and all that. But it's the marketing, getting someone's attention and saying, here's a book worth your time. Take a look at this. That's a constant challenge. And on top of that, we have to be thinking 6 months to a year ahead of time. So right now, we're making sure that all of our spring titles are getting off to press, and we're also reading for next fall and next spring. So we wear different hats constantly. So it's kind of a balancing act. And it's funny, people ask me, how's it going? I say, well, I'm still trying to find my balance. And one of my friends said, well, you're never going to do that. You're always going to feel off balance. I think that's correct. Also, I'm working on a book that I'll probably never finish called Taming the Octopus, which is, that's how I feel.
Great title.
I'm this guy with 8 arms, and I'm trying to juggle 16 different things at one time with these 8 arms, and I'm constantly dropping things. And that's part of it too. So you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I run this operation, even if it's just a small press? I mean, there's so much going on, and you've got to wear all these different hats, not just the publisher hat, but the editor hat, the acquisitions hat, the marketing hat, and there are dozens of hats under each one of those levels. So it's, building a team is important, but having a small press is what kind of a team can you afford?
Right.
So it's got a lot of challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, and those challenges can keep you, and as you say, off balance. You often feel like that, but it probably keeps you creative as well.
Right.
As the industry continues to grow and it's so unpredictable. So, one of the major components these days of any author's marketing platform is the growth of the audiobooks, and that has surged dramatically in the past year alone. So, as a publisher, what is your feel on that? Do you do that component or offer that component to your authors?
No, and I'll tell you why. Poetry and short fiction, I think there's an audio component to that could work, but there again, I think a lot of poets would rather read than listen to, unless the author's right there in front of them, giving a reading.
Okay.
I don't see where a lot of poetry books would sell lots of audio books unless you're a major poet, former U.S. poet laureate, Maxine Kumin, Billy Collins, Rita Dove, Natasha Trethewey. Those poets come to mind where they have an international audience, a large international audience, and a large platform. But I'm not a big fan of the audiobook for that reason. And I think that the audiobook for long hauls, the novel, I think, is probably best suited for that, the memoir, the bigger books.
Okay.
I could be wrong, and I may be wrong, but I also know after, 10 years in the music business, I know what it takes to create anything audio. And the hours it takes and the expense it takes probably wouldn't offset the sales for poetry or short fiction. And I think it's a distraction to getting out and pushing the book and talking about that. And that is just my opinion.
Okay, fair enough.
I've been known to be wrong.
So, in closing, Kevin, what are two of the most important things a writer should know about the publishing industry today when they come to you?
Well, I think the publishing business in general requires a lot of patience, that nothing is going to happen overnight, and you shouldn't expect it to happen overnight. There are ways to the top of the mountain, and you can either get there by helicopter and claim victory, or you can take it one step at a time and actually feel victory. And a lot of writers today, unfortunately, are taking the helicopter, because they send their manuscript out a few times and get it rejected, that they just kind of say, oh, well, I'm just going to self-publish it and put it out there and see what happens. And my response to that is, why would you take something you obviously love, that you've spent years creating, and just throw it out there in this jungle with so many other books without proper representation? We're a small press, but when we publish a book, it brings a little credibility to that book because we've got a reputation for publishing quality short fiction and poetry. And we don't have the platform that Random House or Simon & Schuster or some of the publishers have, for visibility, but it does offer you a platform. We've had 8 or 9 of our short fiction authors move on to larger than the presses in New York, the publishers in New York, for their novels, only because they had a short fiction collection that an agent took notice of and said, do you have a novel? And we have several agents who follow who we're publishing. And you're not going to get that if you're just putting your work out there. You've got to be patient. And I think that's the thing about the publishing industry that a lot of writers don't realize, that you don't start playing guitar and then a few weeks later or a year or two later, you're talking about performing at Carnegie Hall. That just doesn't happen that way. You've got to put years into it. You've got to be patient. And it reminds me of a poem by Adrian Rice, who you had on your show recently.
Right.
And he's got a poem that I think applies to anybody in any industry, anywhere. If you've any ambition, lose it early. For what's ambition worth if you're here to tell the truth? And
Oh,
that's what a lot of writers miss, is that if you're sitting there writing and you're thinking about the book and getting it published and all that, your head's in the wrong place. You need to be true to the page. You need to be looking at your work and making it the very best it can be, and then give it a chance to go out and speak the truth to the world. One poem at a time, one story at a time.
mm,
And the book will happen. If you're doing that, the book will happen by default. The book will usually come to you at some point. And
yes.
that's what's missing today with a lot of writers. They're putting the book before the writing. And when you do that, you're not doing yourself any favors.
Wow. That is just beautiful advice. Wow. Thank you for sharing that quote too by Adrian
You're welcome.
Rice, one of the finest poets writing today. And you are so right, because a writer's words will far outlive them. So they should make them great. Well, Kevin, thank you for that. Oh, beautiful words. My guest today has been Kevin Watson, founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief at Press 53. To find out more about Kevin, Press 53, and the High Road Book Festival, you'll find links in the show notes or at Press 53, that's press53.com. Kevin, thank you. Wow, what a treat.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks to our sponsors, Macintosh Bookshop and the Beaufort Bookstore, two of the best independent bookstores in the South. Macintosh Bookshop and the Beaufort Bookstore, where the best Southern stories begin.
You've been listening to Literary Latte with Lynda Bouchard. For more information, visit bookingauthorsinc.com.